I don't know that Bitcoin needs to be Ethereum. And I think that's interesting. And I say this as someone who's like an ETH dev and I do Bitcoin stuff. What do people actually want to do with their Bitcoin? Access their equity, earn yield. That's it. Ethereum lets you do all sorts of things. Solana lets you do all sorts of things. I don't know that Bitcoin needs to be the next Ethereum or Solana. Those things already exist. People just need yield and access to their equity.
With Matt Luongo, the founder of Thesis, which makes many different Bitcoin-related applications. Matt, it's great to have you back on the Defiant.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just discussing before starting to record that Matt actually had been on the Defiant a while ago talking about TBTC, but Thesis has grown and with so many different applications. And I think that tracks with Bitcoin's evolution as well. So I wanted to start with the state of Bitcoin, which is a very broad question.
I mean, I love that one though. I love it because it's not quite what people think, right? I think one of the things that interests me about Bitcoin is that to the traditional finance world, Bitcoin is still like they're embracing it. It's still weird. You can still talk to someone who's, a trader who calls Bitcoin a Ponzi, and they're professional financiers who sneer. Then you have Ray Dalio saying 15% of your net worth should be in Bitcoin, right? So on the one hand, we have this like change happening in traditional finance, but then in the rest of crypto, people look at Bitcoin and they're like, oh, it's a boomer coin. And they think like, well, Bitcoin, it's already like a suit coin. And so it's interesting to be in this spot where on the one hand, we're getting acceptance from people who used to scoff, but it's not there yet. And then on the other hand, we have our app developer friends on all of these chains who are just like hearing that things in Bitcoin are changing, hearing that people are starting to build more tech and that applications are coming back, but they're not really seeing the sauce. They're kind of just hearing about it. So it's interesting. It's an interesting time for the network, and it's an interesting time for the asset.
So, I'd love to dive a bit deeper on Bitcoin utility, because I think, what everyone kind of has come to a consensus around Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is digital gold, a global store of value. And I think that's pretty an accepted view even by institutions now with ETFs, and I think that's been kind of the big narrative this year. But with all of the different applications that you're building on Bitcoin, I love your take on how Bitcoin utility.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's go back to go forward, right? So I got in the space, and the first company that I built was in 2014, and that's Fold, and they actually went public earlier this year. And Fold started as a Bitcoin payments company. So this was before Ethereum existed. This was before the Bitcoin Cash fork. This was before, and every crypto person, everyone involved was a Bitcoiner. And then you had these random little like this chains for Iceland and there's Dogecoin. But like for the most part, all of the different cultures and all of the optimism that we were kind of building was in one place. And, leading up to the Bitcoin Cash split, you had these competing narratives of like, no, we're trying to build a circular economy, and no, this is digital gold. And that was responding to, well, Bitcoin was hard to use. Bitcoin was expensive to use. So downsides, but it was also responding to upsides, which is like, well, this thing has gone up and I feel like an idiot for having used it as money, right? I feel bad. And so I went back the other day and I was looking at, we used to help people buy coffee with Bitcoin. And it was almost, I looked in today's dollars, almost $500 million that people used in the first version of Fold today. Now, actually I have had a few people who are like fake kind of mad at me when they meet me in person, like, I lost so much, but like, for the most part, I'm not getting tons of angry emails or anything. But it's just interesting because that shift, I was on the other side. And when it happened, I sort of realized that digital gold we needed that to have the foundation for everything else. And that was kind of a tough pill for me to swallow as an engineer. And as a startup person, I wanted to build new things. And what I think is really cool is today we're starting to get utility, but we're seeing it look a little bit different. So my house right here that I'm standing in is actually financed by Bitcoin. And what I did was I didn't do some weird thing with JP Morgan where I like begged them for a loan against my ETF or something. I took Bitcoin, I put it in TBTC, I borrowed using Curve and Curve USD. I switched that to USDC, and that's how I wired the company to pay for my house. So, I had this half of a traditional mortgage and then a collateral backed loan for the other half of my house. And that's pretty big for me. I've tried to do this 3 times. It's actually what led to me building TBTC years ago in the first place, because I kept wanting to just like save in my Bitcoin and then spend USD against it. So I think people are starting to realize that, but we're seeing it happen in weird ways. We're seeing like the whole Bitcoin treasury company thing. People have just reinvented multisigs. And now they have all of the cool lending things that Wall Street has always had through the treasury company. So I think the race right now for Bitcoin is, do we want to do things on chain? Because we're going to get all the stuff that we've always wanted, but do we want to be able to do it without asking someone permission? And that's really what our work has been focused on at Thesis. Our latest product, Mezo, is completely focused on people who want to finance their home, buy a car, buy groceries, but they don't want to be the next Bitcoin pizza guy. And that's kind of the focus.
So I think like the big change is that initially a Bitcoin utility was focused on, okay, like how can we easily pay for things with Bitcoin and spend Bitcoin? And, that wasn't a small challenge, because you had kind of the problem of merchants having to accept Bitcoin and kind of the delays and like waiting for confirmations and, all those kind of UX challenges that people were solving for at that time.
Yep.
But
that used to be the big thing. Every merchant that was announced, people were thrilled. Yeah,
exactly. But as time went on and Bitcoin started, gaining, becoming more valuable. Like nobody wants to let go of their Bitcoin.
That's right.
So kind of the big change now is how to borrow against Bitcoin and use it as collateral. Yeah. And I think, that in the previous cycle, we had big CeFi companies enabling that. BlockFi, Mezo.
Yep.
But many of
there's still a hole. Yeah. I mean, obviously, so a lot of holders got really burned, especially by BlockFi. Like Nexo, I feel like the users were a little more degenerate. And there's still, exactly, they're still trying to, But a lot of people.
BlockFi was kind of the big one that
was the big one. Exactly. And I think that, it's hard because I saw someone tweeting the other day, like, I got so burned by BlockFi that I'm not going to lend my Bitcoin again until Bank of America does it. And I almost fell out of my chair because I'm like, oh yeah, big Bitcoin maxi needs Bank of America to protect his money, So like, it's hard to hear. It's hard to see. But what I learned from BlockFi, I mean, obviously there's a ton to say around, censorship resistance and building strong decentralized systems that I think a lot of Bitcoiners, because they haven't had the infrastructure, Bitcoin is decentralized, but that's it. And so the idea of being able to do more with their money in a way that, doesn't involve a counterparty or involves so many counterparties that it's like you don't even have one, that's pretty foreign. And most of the time when they've heard stuff like that, it's been a scam. And if you think, well, that's actually a great rule of thumb. When someone says this thing is great and decentralized and you think it's a scam, well, 90% of the time when you hear that, that's true. But that other 10% of the time, you're building things that are world changing and that really can move like how power flows in the world, So anyway, it's hard because for a lot of our products, we're kind of having to help people who might have gotten burned by something like BlockFi understand, why is this time different? It's like, well, it's transparent. It's on chain. You can see there's no rehypothecation. Or if you want that, you can see how much rehypothecation. And that's so different from these opaque order books that Genesis and BlockFi were dealing with. So, but the other thing that I learned from BlockFi is I don't know that Bitcoin needs to be Ethereum. And I think that's interesting. And I say this as someone who's like an ETH dev and I do Bitcoin stuff. Mm-hmm. What do people actually want to do with their Bitcoin? Access their equity? Earn yield. That's it. Ethereum lets you do all sorts of things. Solana lets you do all sorts of things. I don't know that Bitcoin needs to be the next Ethereum or Solana. Those things already exist. People just need yield and access to their equity. And so, that's been our focus is really just on those two areas.
That's really interesting. So it's a bit of a shift from TBTC, which allowed you to do things with Bitcoin on Ethereum.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, TBTC is, I think it's like almost $750 million right now. So it's doing just fine. But it's a bit of like, well, where do people use TBTC? And if you look, it's like, okay, you use it as collateral or you use it to earn yield. That's about it. There's a few different things, but yeah.
But with Mezo, the idea is that you're doing it on Bitcoin you're doing those things.
Yeah.
Using Bitcoin as collateral natively on
Yes.
Bitcoin.
That's exactly. I mean, as natively as we can, right? So there's a whole, if we switch into like tech and nerd sniping, there's a whole debate about like can something like Mezo exist at all? Like what is native on top of Bitcoin? And the answer is no. Like Bitcoin is missing some serious things on the tech side to allow us to do something that you would expect from like using Aave on Ethereum today. But our goal with Mezo is to make it as close as possible for Bitcoin users and to make it so that they don't have to do things like, I really want to move issues like using MetaMask. If you've used one Bitcoin wallet for years, asking you, hey, here's a new thing. It runs in your browser, but don't worry, it's actually safe. Like that's a big leap. And so a big focus on Mezo has been you can show up with your ledger, with the Bitcoin app and all of the stuff under it, smart accounts and all of these things happen, but you don't have to leave your Bitcoin experience. You deposit Bitcoin. Bitcoin is gas, you borrow against it, and then you can use your stable and you can withdraw it. And, the idea is to be able to finance your house or buy groceries. So yeah, it's a business need and I think a user need first. And the tech for me has been, well, we've had this for a few years, so now let's take full advantage of it.
Are you doing this directly on Bitcoin mainnet or?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you could call. So, like, if we were in a debate, I would probably call Mezo a sidechain. Okay. The only layer 2 that is currently live on Bitcoin that I think would be worth calling a layer 2 myself is Lightning. People are trying to do better, so I think there are some really interesting products that are playing with BitVM and some other stuff. But honestly, they're kind of a kludge, and they're a kludge because without these soft forks on Bitcoin, ultimately, it's a hack on a hack, and it's just quite a bit easier to create a side system and frankly safer. So that's been our focus so far. Actually, Mezo is directly built on top of TBTC, so we have 5 years of sort of like Lindy effect safe operation that we can extend with Mezo.
So talk about if you're a sidechain. Talk about security,
Sure.
And yeah, it's kind of Meso security derived from Bitcoin. Does it depend on
absolutely not?
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, like the idea of deriving another chain's security from Bitcoin, it's pretty weak in practice. So we've had Rootstock that's been doing that since 2018. Rootstock is EVM compatible. It's merge mined by something like 90% of the network, but no one cares. Like no one uses it. No one cares. They and I say this, and I have a lot of respect for the team behind Rootstock. They were so early to this stuff, but the problem they're solving, people aren't not using systems because they do or do not use merge mining, or they do or do not. This clearly is not relevant to users, right? And then similarly, we have things like Babylon. And so the idea is, if you're coming from like an Ethereum lens, it's something like EigenLayer, where you can lock up a bunch of your BTC, and then you can use that economic security to secure a chain. But then we're also not seeing people use it. So, my takeaway from this, and this is why I step away from just being an engineer to a business person, is like the market says they don't want these things. Or at least that these things are not sufficient, right? It's not sufficient to have economic or hash power security from Bitcoin. So no, how Mezo works is we start as a proof of authority chain with 21 validators. As we grow, our roadmap does eventually move to using Bitcoin economic security. And the idea is you stake your Bitcoin, and then as the Mezo token drops, you can actually use it to multiply your yield for your different Bitcoin holdings. So I'm pretty happy with that economic design, but I don't think that it's the thing. I think it's a fun thing that you can talk about with kind of like wider crypto people who all want to put things in quadrants. But I don't really think it's a big thing for users because, Lightning gets some usage, but not that much. And it's a great L2 from a technical perspective.
But in the end, I think, users just want the practical aspects of, okay, what can you do with this? And then the security is kind of, I think, table stakes for people. Like you assume
exactly
that what you're using is safe, which maybe is not the best.
Yeah. No, I mean,
that's the reality.
I have learned, some of the things that I know about security as a longtime practitioner. It's so interesting because people will ask, well, is it secure? And then the things they ask as follow-up questions are so interesting because it's never, some people have learned, oh, well, is it audited? And it's like, I can point to the list on Rect News of all of the audited projects that have gotten pulled down. Or they'll say, oh, well, does it use the fancy? And then they'll like look for a buzzword. And it's like, the only thing that proves security. Security is in a sense, it's impossible to prove in practice. My applied cryptographer friends will foam at the mouth and say, no, you can prove that. But in practice, an actual system that's actually running, you cannot prove its security. But the only thing you can do is you can put a big bug bounty on it and you can let it run for a long time. And if it doesn't go down, you take the time multiplied by the amount of money, and that's the security. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners get this because that's Lindy. That is the Lindy effect. That is this core idea that maxis love to like throw around, right? Is like, well, Bitcoin is number one and therefore it's more powerful. And, there's their whole, but it's actually a great idea in security. So Ethereum is not going to go down because it's been running 10 years and it hasn't gone down. So like betting on it going down is probably not a good bet. And obviously Bitcoin for 15. So anyway, that's our thought around security at Mezo is, well, TBTC has had almost $1 billion in it for 5 years. I feel very good about the security model that I've got right now. I'm really excited about, I want to see people do ZK rollups, or I guess they're not quite ZK rollups, but optimistic ZK rollups on Bitcoin and some of these other attempts. But I'm not going to be the first one over the hill with my money, because I think, it's like the model will look really good in practice. And then, well, there's a bug in the prover. So these things happen. Eventually, in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be better. But my thought is that users want something now. And let's give it to them, Lindy, and then we can upgrade for everything else.
That makes sense. Okay, so then you're using this sort of proof of authority sidechain with Mezo and letting people put Bitcoin as collateral to borrow stablecoins. Which stablecoins can you borrow?
Yeah, so initially MUSD. So we're launching a Bitcoin. We've just launched a Bitcoin-backed stable. Shortly, and this is happening today and over the next few weeks, we're expanding the different types of things you can borrow, where you can get USDT and USDC and things like that. We wanted to start with a Bitcoin-backed stable, with a new stable, though, because I think one of the things that I hear a lot as people are waking up to borrowing against their Bitcoin and not just lending it for yield, but actually borrowing it to fund their life, is you'll have really big guys who have made incredibly prescient bets into Bitcoin with names like Cantor. And then you'll have a really well-known Bitcoin companies like Strike. And they'll announce like, well, we're actually going to start lending against your Bitcoin. And they'll talk about how Bitcoin is pristine collateral, right? These are like core talking points. And it sounds great. And then you keep going, you're like, okay, I'm brilliant for holding Bitcoin because it's the best collateral. And so you go and you look to take out a loan and they're like, and it'll cost you 13%. And you're like, that doesn't sound like the rate I would get for pristine collateral. That sounds like the rate I would get if you're not really sure I'm going to pay you back. So I think when I saw that, I kind of started thinking, okay, well, USDC, USDT, these things are great, but you're competing at a minimum, you're competing with treasury yield, right? So at a minimum, there's that interest. And then there's this whole thing where credit funds are not really comfortable lending against Bitcoin yet. So our thought was this, if you can do something that looks more like DAI, an early MakerDAO that's just against Bitcoin, you can give people not just low rates, which are cool, but not forever. You can give people fixed rates. So the problem with my financing my house with Curve, and I could do it with Aave now, is that when Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these other assets go up, my interest rate is determined by DGens. So, I don't get a sweet low locked in rate like you would expect from a US mortgage or from a similar debt product. And so that's why we started with our own stable, is we said, okay, well, the cool thing about launching with our own stable is you have an unlimited supply. As long as there's Bitcoin, there's always MUSD. You can give people fixed rates, which is very uncommon in DeFi, and you can get them to be low. So initially MUSD is starting with a 1% APR, and that's a governable rate. But once you've locked in your credit line, it stays locked in. So you, for whatever you put in initially, can continue to borrow against your Bitcoin at that rate. So yeah, it's really just some very different economics that we wanted to give people.
Very cool. Okay, so how it works is people lock up Bitcoin on Mezo, and then MUSD is issued
minted against it directly.
Against that collateral.
Exactly.
And the rate is 1%?
The rate is the introductory rate. That won't last for very long, but yeah, the introductory rate is 1%. I expect over time it'll probably approach treasuries and maybe be a little bit higher than that. Ultimately, that's going to be governable by token holders as the chain continues to launch and people start running it themselves. So yeah.
When you introduce USDT and USDC.
Yeah. So the idea is that if you want to go borrow, all you have to do effectively is so there's two. There's a short answer and there's a long answer, and I'll try to land with medium. So the short answer is that as long as there's heavy liquidity in the pairs, and then someone who's willing to take an interest rate spread, you can sort of take that one system and expand it to accepting USDC, USDT, et cetera. And then basically the spread is what's incentivizing the pools. So the spread in those rates is what pushes people to actually show up with more USDC and USDT. But the bigger idea is something that we're working on called layered lending. So short term, we want to enable stables, but long term, people should be able to borrow against anything. They should be able to borrow against their house or their pile of gift cards in a drawer or their bonk on Solana, just like whatever the asset is. And the interesting thing about long tail lending is, there's a problem where you don't have a buyer of the last resort. And so our thought is, well, if we have these people who are putting Bitcoin in, a lot of them want to earn yield on their Bitcoin, and they may or may not want to borrow against it, but they also want to earn yield. So the other side of the market that we're growing second is, okay, if you want to borrow against other assets, Bitcoiners can actually underwrite your loan market. So that's where this whole thing is going. We start with MUSD, we add USDC, USDT, USDE, and then finally we actually have long tail lending where Bitcoiners are kind of the senior tranche. So yeah, it becomes it's a yield engine, right? The only native yield in Bitcoin is from loans. Anyone who says there's yield otherwise, well, not historically. So,
and can you start earning yield now?
You actually can, but of course it's a promise of a token, right? So if you want to go right now and you want to earn on your WBTC or TBBTC or CB Coinbase BTC, you can go check out Upshift. There's Vault. It's earning 30% APY, which is obviously absurd and not going to last forever. So you're welcome to check that out. And then Mezo is turning on Bitcoin staking in the next month and a half. And that's when you'll actually be able to natively earn on the chain.
Oh, nice. Very cool. And then you recently bought a Lolli. How does that fit into this whole ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, so, Fold started as a payments company. It became a rewards company. And part of that pivot was the realization that people wanted to earn Bitcoin. And I think the reason we were interested in buying Lolli, and they're not the last acquisition we have to announce, they're just the most recent, is because, well, one, I just have huge respect for their users and their founding team. They were an early competitor for us at Fold, very familiar with them. We have a lot of customers in common. I'm slowly learning to say we and realize these are my customers now. I'm still kind of in shock because this is my first, bigger acquisition at Thesis. But one of the other things I think that I kind of learned with Fold, people want to earn BTC, and then around the world, people also want to earn USD. So I ask myself, who in the world needs a new stablecoin? And right now it's what stablecoin summer, right? Who needs a new stablecoin? And my answer is no one. I don't think anyone needs a new stablecoin. I think a lot of people want USD. The stablecoin is just the wrapper. Who has the best distribution or who does this or who has the most customers. And so, when I looked at that problem, I thought to myself, well, okay, where can I find people who are interested in Bitcoin and who are interested in kind of earning into this new financial world order? And of course, I thought rewards. So the reason that we bought Lolli is to take them global, to expand from just a sort of earn as you shop reward system to something where, okay, if you want cash or if you want Bitcoin globally, we can satisfy that and we can help you earn. And I think that's pretty cool, especially in sort of newer, emerging markets that are looking for maybe an escape from their local currency, but they're not totally ready to go all in on Bitcoin. So that's the plan. And of course, obviously this is going to be very much plugged into Mezo. I see this as the purchase of Lolli for us is an opportunity to help a whole bunch of Bitcoiners be introduced to some of these newer ideas around utility.
So for people who want to get started putting their Bitcoin to work,
of course,
what should they do?
Well, let's see. It all depends on where you are, right? If you're in an ETF, if you're using custodian, or if you self-custody. So I'll start. If you self-custody, if you have your Bitcoin on a ledger or a Trezor or something like that, we would love to help you borrow against it. We would love to help you fund your life. And I don't mean anything, absurd. You can still have a long time horizon, but, buy your wife something nice, have a home for your family. And you can go to Mezo.org and check that out. It works just with your Bitcoin wallet. You can show up, you sign a message with your wallet, you deposit Bitcoin, you can borrow, and you can start spending. And if you're in those other categories where you're a little bit bigger or you're an exchange traded product, obviously email me, and we will help you use the system.
Well, I think, have so many years of working to make Bitcoin
making me feel old here.
I mean, I've been here for a while too. So not the only
I'm like, man, I'm talking a lot about houses and people's growing families. Damn.
Oh my God. Yeah. I was at Ethereum 10th birthday party yesterday, and the main topic of conversation wasn't ETH or anything. It was people's kids.
Exactly. I mean, and I love it. You love to see it, but it's also ooh, yeah, we were pretty punk rock back in the day, and now we're feeling a little
just grown ups. We're actual adults.
Yeah, but I think that's awesome. I mean, it's nice to think of how we're we're punk and we're changing everything, but I think it's so cool that our space is actually about ready for people who are adults and for growing up.
Yeah, and it's why people will start to demand these kinds of use cases that you're enabling. But thanks for sharing all the latest with us. Really interesting stuff, and we'll keep covering it at the Defiant.
Thank you so much for having me.